What's up, bro? क्या हाल है? Uh,
You can pause the recording for now.
oh,
I'm going to record the meeting. I forgot that. All right. So it's thanking our sponsors, Pragmatic, Pendo, Architect, Market Driven Business, Personify, Tech Connects, and Intuit for always supporting us and the product community. We also have an update. We are welcoming new board members this month. We have Adam Aronson joining us from Q4. He's the Senior Director of Product there. We have Heidi Ram joining us. She has been in the product recruitment industry for over 20 years in Toronto and works at Martin Bassett Associates. And we also have Victor Skalev, who's a VP of Product at Proposify. These are the new board members that we have joining us this month to help us enforce our mission of growing the product community across the GTA. And before we dive into the event, a couple of housekeeping items. So this session is quite interactive. Ravi has a lot of prompts within the presentation. So feel free to share your thoughts, comments, feedback, question on the chat, and I'll be picking up people randomly to share their thoughts with Ravi, and bringing people up for asking questions as well. So feel free to keep the conversation going and keep contributing. It's an interactive session. That's how we've designed this workshop to be. And with that, Ravi, welcome, and please take us away.
Excellent. Thanks so much for the welcome. I am excited to be with everyone. Let me share my screen so we can get started. Let's see. There we go. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right, perfect. So excited to be with everyone today. I've adapted a session that I've done before to make it more interactive. I know we've got a really great room full of product managers and product leaders. And so I want this to be as helpful as possible. So as I go through things, if you have questions, leave them in the chat or even jump in. I want to make sure we're talking through those questions and that we're having a conversation. And then I've got a couple of prompts sprinkled throughout so that we can talk about some of the material as it applies to you and how you're thinking about your skills and your career. I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much to Rhythm and TPMA for inviting me. We're going to do a session which is about how to grow your skills. So how to think about your skills as a product manager and product leader. One of the things that's true about product is it's just gotten impossibly broad. Nobody is great at everything. And so what's really important to be a successful product leader is to understand where your strengths are and to understand where you don't have strengths and where you might want to invest to grow, or you might want to complement yourself with teammates who have opposing strengths that complement yours really nicely. The goal of product is not to be great at everything, but to know where you really shine and to put yourself in a role where you can make the most use of those talents and skills. So very quickly about me, I'm Ravi Mehta. I'm a lifelong product leader. I started coding when I was really young. I started developing computer games when I was 9 and just instantly fell in love with technology and particularly consumer tech. And I've been doing that ever since, and it's been a considerable number of years since those days. I've held a bunch of different product leadership roles. I was an early PM at Xbox. I was head of consumer product at TripAdvisor. I had a product leadership role at Facebook where I was focused on Gen Z. And then I was the chief product officer at Tinder during a really interesting time when the company was thinking about what its next generation strategy needs to be for that next generation. And for about the last year and a half or so, I've been an executive in residence at Reforge, where I might have met some of you. I've been leading programs on product strategy and product leadership. And then I've recently started a new company. So about 6 months ago, I raised a pre-seed round and I'm building a new company called Scale Higher. One of the things that I've gotten the most out of from my career is not just building products, but really building teams and helping individual PMs figure out what they want to, where they want to focus and how they can be as successful as possible. I've hired close to 100 PMs in my various roles, including many who were first-time PMs. It's really gratifying to see where they are today, many of whom are directors and VPs throughout the industry. And my new company is really focused on doing that in a more scalable way. Throughout my conversations that I've had over the past year and a half, especially post-pandemic, I've seen that people are having a harder and harder time getting the one-on-one guidance that they need to feel like they have the support to get to the career goals that they've set for themselves. So I started a company called Scale Hire with my co-founder, Victoria Young, and our mission is to democratize professional coaching. So if anyone's curious about that, you can go to scalehire.com and sign up for, we've got a couple of different offerings right now. We have something that we're developing called guided masterclasses, where you can go through a course, and rather than it being like a cohort-based course, it's actually a course that you go through one-on-one with the help of a coach. And then we're also building a community of rising leaders who are looking to help themselves and help each other be the best that they possibly can at professional development. And part of the things that we'll talk about today are things that I've developed to help individual PMs really understand their skills so that they know where to invest and where they'll really shine. So to get started, very early on in my career, I was at Microsoft. Microsoft did a lot of the really early work to define what product management is. And this was probably, not to date myself, 1999 timeframe, 2000 timeframe. I met a senior product leader at Microsoft, and she said, product managers are like the mortar in a brick wall. Like mortar, they must fluidly fill the gaps to make the whole street team stronger. And that really resonated with me then. It resonates even more today. Product management is a fluid, connective role. It's highly demanding. It varies considerably by the situation and from company to company. There's been articles about how the product manager is the CEO of the product. There's been articles about how the product manager is not the CEO of the product. And so different companies define product in really different ways. And as product managers, it's important for us to understand the environment that we're in, the skills that we have, and how to align those. And so I feel like no matter how product management is defined, the job is really the same. And ultimately, the job of product management is not just to ship features, but really to deliver business impact. Features, product, it's just a means to an end. And the end is to deliver value for customers and help the company realize its strategy. And so great product managers do whatever it takes to deliver valuable outcomes for their users, their team, and their company. But delivering impact is really hard. And so the best product managers that I've worked with are intellectual athletes. They excel at a diverse and mutually reinforcing set of skills. So let's look at what that actually takes and what these skills are. Years ago, when I was at TripAdvisor, we were hiring pretty quickly, and we were hiring product managers who hadn't had prior product management experience. We created a couple of programs. One was an undergraduate rotation program, and another was a rotation program for business school graduates, for people to get their first product management role, and over a 2-year rotational program to really grow into that role. And so as we did that, we asked ourselves, what does a product manager actually do? Is there a canonical set of skills or competencies that we can define for product management? And as we thought that through, we came up with this system of 12 competencies organized into 4 different areas. I'm going to go through each of these in more detail, but the 4 areas, just to give a quick overview, are product execution, the ability to build exceptional products, customer insight, the ability to understand and deliver on customer needs, product strategy, the ability to drive business impact via product innovation, influencing people, the ability to rally people around the team's work. So there's a lot to master here. There's a lot of different skills. One of the things that's also true about the product role is there's a lot of points of tension. This is a role that requires people to be deeply empathetic, but also rigorously analytical. It's a goal that requires qualitative understanding as well as quantitative understanding. It requires a really fastidious attention to detail and grand abstract thinking. And the best PMs, they're both creative innovators, and they're really, rigorous optimizers. And so ultimately, in order to excel, you have to excel not just at a single point in a spectrum, but oftentimes at opposing points of the spectrum. So let's go in and talk about each one of these areas in more detail. And if people have questions as we go through about how any of these are defined, please feel free to jump in. So the first area, which is really the foundation of product management, is product execution. And product execution is defined as the ability to build and launch exceptional products. And so the best PMs, they really strive to execute flawlessly. They know there's already enough risk in understanding customers' needs and crafting a strategy around the needs. And so they can't afford unforced errors. And so really great PMs take product execution really seriously. And there's three different competencies that I think are important to product execution. The first one is functional specification. And no matter what form it takes, a good spec is something that rallies the team around a goal, provides enough context for the team to execute it flawlessly. And so, gone are the days of book length PRDs, and now specs are much more agile, sometimes really consisting of wireframes, sometimes nothing more than what's on a napkin. But a really good spec, the ultimate purpose is to give people context, to rally people behind an idea, and to help them execute it as flawlessly as possible. The second thing is product delivery. And so the key thing here is for PMs to be able to work quickly and iteratively with a broad set of stakeholders throughout the organization in order to deliver on a product. And so, I think about this almost like controlled chaos. The amount of different inputs that go into a product, the different skill sets from designers to engineers to user researchers that go into a great product are so diverse and so chaotic. The PM is a person who doesn't take the chaos out, but really adds control and helps to channel that energy towards delivering great product. And then the last piece is product quality. And I heard a PM from Spotify years ago say something that really stuck with me, which is quality is actually your product's most important feature. And that's really true. When a product works flawlessly, you start to depend on it in a very different way than a product that's not so dependable. And so think about it. When was the last time you used Spotify and it got in the way of your music listening experience? I can't think of when. And for me, I think this is one of the ingredients as to why they were able to beat Tidal. Tidal in terms of the listening experience dropped out pretty frequently. And because they were trying to deliver better quality audio, they had a harder time doing that over a low quality connection or a slow connection, where Spotify really focused on making that a high quality experience that was dependable. So this is the first area, and an important area, especially early in a product manager's career, to get really right, because this becomes the foundation for everything else that a product manager or product leader builds. The second area is customer insight. So customer insight is defined as understanding and fulfilling a customer's needs. Product managers are cultural ambassadors for their customers. Oftentimes I hear product managers ask me, should I learn to code? Should I learn engineering? And my response is, there's so many people within the average tech company that understand technology, but how many of them really understand the customer? That's really uniquely the domain of product as well as customer support. And so I think it's better for PMs to really focus on that deep customer insight than it is to learn how to code. We can have a debate about that. I'm happy to talk more about it. So really importantly is that product managers don't just have to understand users, they really have to empathize with the people that their product serves. And there's three ways in order to be able to do that. The first one is fluency with data. And if you zoom out and you think about what is the purpose of data, the purpose of data is ultimately to establish a causal understanding of how people use our product so that we know if we do X, then people will benefit Y. And so, think about fluency, not just in terms of the analytics, the statistical significance, but in terms of the detailed and quantitative understanding it gives you of customers' needs. The second one that's part of customer insight is voice of the customer. The only way that you can truly understand and empathize with customers is to talk to them. And oftentimes the product team is the voice of the customer in the organization. They are often the team that is the closest to talking to customers and then synthesizing those conversations into an actionable direction. And what I think is interesting is if you think about early stage customers or early stage companies talk to customers a lot, and they're able to get at these really interesting disruptive insights. But as companies get bigger, those conversations with customers start to atrophy. You might not be able to talk to customers as much because of policy or bureaucracy, or there might be a user research team that's doing user research every once in a while. And so as a company moves from early stage to later stage, the PMs kind of move further and further away from the customers. A really great product manager works against that friction and does everything that they can in order to have the conversations that they need to have. A great example of this is when I was at TripAdvisor, there was a group of PMs that would every once in a while hop on the Amtrak train from Boston to New York, because they knew on that train they would be surrounded by travelers, and they would go up and down the aisles and talk to people about where they were going in New York. Did they need to find restaurants or things to do? And they'd have these really impromptu, very valuable customers with travelers in the moment that they're traveling. And then the final piece is user experience design. And great PMs emphasize interaction design as an explicit and critical phase of product development. One of the things that I feel very strongly about is that the best product specs, the best functional specifications are not just verbal or not just written, they're actually visual. At the end of the day, our products in most cases take the form of pixels on a screen. And in order to deliver value to customers, you need to understand how those pixels are actually going to take shape. What's the information architecture? And so this doesn't mean that PMs need to be great designers in and of themselves, but they need to understand the principles of user experience design and be able to work with designers and developers in order to deliver a great user experience that fortifies or fulfills a user's needs rather than gets in the way of those needs.
So Ravi, we do have like a couple of questions coming in,
let's do it.
In the chat. So Ninon is asking, how have you managed executives with different viewpoints? Any insights there or any experiences there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And this is one of the things that, actually in the next area of competency that I think is one of the key 12 competencies is managing up. The way that I think about managing up is ultimately about getting the support you need to accomplish your goals. And that's a mind shift for a lot of people. A lot of people feel like, managing up is really a process of understanding what leadership wants so that I can fulfill it. But ultimately what leadership wants is they want leverage. They want to know that they can count on you in order to understand what customers need and to build those things. And so the people that get more resources, the people that get more support from leadership are the product managers and the product leaders who have demonstrated that ability to provide leverage to the leadership team to help them accomplish their strategy. And so the first thing that I would do in terms of thinking about how to work with leaders with a diverse set of opinions is to understand, what are they solving for, and get at the problem rather than the solution. Oftentimes what happens with a leader is they're trying to provide really clear feedback. And so they come up with a solution to illustrate what they feel is the right path forward. But it might not be that they're tied to the solution. They just want to know that the problem is being solved. So I think that's the first thing, is get at the root cause of what are the different leaders in the business solving for. And then two is to take an evidence-based approach to telling them a story of what you've learned about the customer and how you would go about solving it based on everything that you know. I think there's a tension between leadership and PMs. PMs and product teams want autonomy, and leaders want to feel a sense of control. They want to feel like the work that's being done is going in a direction that they can understand. And each of these different kind of actors has different things that they know better than the other, right? The leaders have a broader perspective. The PMs and the product teams have a deeper perspective. And so the important thing is to, as a product leader, think about how do you bridge the two of those so that you can understand what leaders are solving for, and you can help them understand how what you know about the product and about the customer solves for that thing. And in that, you can win their support and get the resources, the support, the decisions that you need in order to be successful.
Awesome. Well, we do have a lot of other questions coming in as well, but I'll let you continue and then we'll come back and revisit those questions.
Perfect. Great. And we'll have time towards the end as well for Q&A. So
Awesome.
we talked about, we got product execution, we've got customer insight. Those are really fundamental as a person is starting their career. And then there's product strategy and influencing people. And these become increasingly important as a person becomes more senior within an organization. And so what is product strategy is a really important question. And there's a few different ways to think about this. The way I like to think about it is product strategy is ultimately the process of delivering the business impact via product innovation. And so product strategy is the glue that holds the product development and the company strategy together. Good product strategy requires PMs to consistently deliver features that build towards a coherent roadmap that enables a company to achieve its overall strategy. And so what often happens, I think a common failure mode that I see in company or in product strategy is that product teams deliver goals untethered to strategy. So they say, our goal is to increase retention by 10%, but they don't know why they're increasing retention. They don't know how that fits within the strategy. And so really exceptional product managers and product leaders connect what the company is trying to accomplish with the day-to-day activities of the product team in order to make sure that as you deliver features, they're laddering up to a clear why, a clear understanding of what the company is trying to achieve. And there's three things that are an important part of that. The first one is business outcome ownership. So the idea here, as we talked about up front, is to focus on business impact, not just shipping features. Really great PMs, I've noticed, flock to responsibility for the business rather than shy away from it. They foster ownership for their teams. They want the responsibility to move the needle for the company. And those are exactly the types of product managers and product leaders that executives want to support. They want to support teams that have that sense of ownership and that sense of responsibility. Number two is product vision and road mapping. And so early on in a PM's career, their goal is really, about delivering exceptionally on individual features. And then as you become more senior and you start to focus more on product vision and road mapping, the process of weaving individual features into a clear, compelling, and cohesive vision for the product becomes incredibly important. And that becomes a key part of how you deliver strategic impact. The strategic impact is the final piece of the puzzle. TechCrunch has, I don't actually know if they still do this, but they used to have a list that they called the Deadpool. And so it was a list of companies that had been shut down. And one of the things I found really striking about this list is going through it, there were many products on that list that users absolutely loved, that were beautiful and effective and solved interesting problems. But those products may have created some value for customers, but they didn't ultimately provide value to the companies that created them. And so strategic impact is ultimately a matter of bridging the two together and enabling valuable features to ladder up to a valuable roadmap, to ladder up to a valuable strategy that ultimately creates value for both the customer and the company. And so these three things, owning the business outcomes, thinking about your longer term product and vision and roadmap, and thinking about the impact that it has to company strategy, all work together to make sure that the work that you're doing is not just great product work, but great strategic work. And then the last piece, which we all know very well, is influencing people. And I think product management is a uniquely demanding role. From the very first PM roles within a company, once you, as an APM or as a person who's just starting their product management journey, you start to get leadership responsibility and you start to get expected to lead in a 360-degree way within your organization. And so leadership and influencing people is just a deep, deep part of being a great product leader. And I think about this as broken into 3 competencies. The first one is managing across, is stakeholder management. I actually was thinking about changing this to stakeholder inclusion, because ultimately stakeholders don't want to be managed as much as they want to be included. And really great PMs, they're willing to make hard product decisions, but they're also capable of aligning everyone to those decisions, including the people that may have dissented. And so really great stakeholder management is a matter of getting all of the opinions on the table, getting to a decision which is not the compromised decision, not the diluted decision, but is the opinionated decision that's the right one for the product, and where the team who might have disagreed with that decision commits to it, executes that decision flawlessly, and then iterates if they need to based on the information that they get from executing on that decision. The second thing is team leadership. Product managers have a significant amount of leadership experience by the time they start to manage their first direct reports. Nevertheless, managing an individual on your team is different than managing stakeholders. And many new PMs fall into the trap of micromanaging their first reports. So it's important that as a person grows into a team leader, that they see themselves as a coach first and foremost, and that they give their direct reports the tools and the autonomy to succeed. And lastly, like we talked about, incredibly important to product, because product serves such a critical role in company strategy, is managing up. And managing up is ultimately about getting the support that you need to accomplish your goals. It's key to understand what your bosses and other leaders are trying to achieve. It's key to align your work to those objectives. And ultimately, resources are going to flow to the teams who are the most aligned with leadership's objectives. And that's the principal goal of managing up, to understand those objectives, to influence those objectives and then to connect your work to those objectives. So I have a question for everyone. But before we get into that, Rhythm, do we want to go through a couple of questions from the group?
Yeah, like related to like influencing, I see a question here by Dimitri. Like, how do you get buy-in from senior technical developers who know how product works better than you? So true, so true. This is such a good question.
Yeah. So, you're each going to have a thing that you probably know better than the other. They're going to understand how the product works better. And you're likely going to be closer to the customer and understand what the customer needs better. And both of those are really important. And so I think the first thing is to think about it as a conversation. Ultimately, you're on the same team. You're trying to drive in the same direction, and you're trying to bridge those two pieces together. You're trying to bridge feasibility with user need. And so if you start from that and you say, look, we're solving the same problem, which is we ultimately want to build a product that's successful for the customer, given the realities of development and legacy and how the product works today, then you can start to have a conversation that's really inclusive about of the engineer's opinion, that synthesizes together your opinion with their opinion and then gets to the right answer. I think too often, product managers get into a role with engineering leaders where it's kind of an us versus them role, and PMs see their role as to push the accelerator and engineers see their role as to push the brakes. And if you push the accelerator and a brake on a car at the same time, it's either not going to go anywhere or it's going to spin out of control. And so really important is to not do that, to understand that actually the thing to do is to work together to figure out, where do we want to go? How do we want to get there? And ultimately, how do we solve things in a way that is practical, both in terms of what the customer wants, as well as in terms of what the technology can do?
Awesome. Let's take one more question here. So Andrew is asking, from your experience, which area of focus has been the most difficult to realize? Why is that? And how did you overcome that?
Yeah, for me personally, or for just in general?
I think it's, he asks, how did you overcome? So I think for you, maybe you could share that.
Cool. That sounds good. So let me this is a great lead in to our conversation for everyone, or a question for everyone. So in these 4 areas, I think nobody excels at all 4 of these areas. And I'm going to go into a little bit about how you can chart out your own shape and understand where you excel and what are some gaps that you might have. I think for me personally, the things that I tend, as an individual, I tend not to be great at the product execution stuff, which is important to be really good at, because you need to be great at the details. And so, I can write really good functional specs, but it takes extra effort for me to focus on working really closely with the teams to deliver. And then also quality is something that I really value, but I haven't had a great amount of experience understanding how to set up the systems necessary to deliver a really high quality product. So I've been lucky, I think, as as you get more senior, as we'll talk about in a bit, the emphasis relative of these different competencies changes, and more senior roles put more emphasis on product strategy and influencing people and less on execution and insight. And so, as I've gotten more senior, I've gotten a little bit away from execution, which has meant, things are more aligned with what I naturally gravitate towards. But things I've had to focus on are product delivery, product quality. In terms of like how I like to approach products, I'm much more voice of the customer and user experience driven than I am data driven. I can go deep into the data, but I often feel like the data only tells part of the picture. And I've got to constantly look at, am I giving the data enough weight relative to the research? And I know other data driven PMs do the opposite. They spend a lot of time with the data, and they've got to check themselves to make sure that they're giving enough weight to the research and the qualitative side of things. So that brings us to a really good question for everyone, and I want to talk to a few people and get your thoughts on this. So as you look at these 12 competencies, what one competency do you feel you excel at the most? And then the second question is, what competency do you want to invest in over the next year? It's January. We've got the full year ahead of us. I think one of the great things about PMs is almost everyone that I've talked to in product is committed to continuously grow. So where do you want to grow over the next year? And it could be investing in your strength. It could be investing in an area that you feel like needs development.
Yep, not too late for 2022 resolutions.
Not too late. You're only 3 weeks into the year.
Yeah. Okay. I see Trevor has posted a comment. Maybe Trevor, if you want to, I'll ask you to unmute yourself, and probably you can talk about your competency.
Hey, yeah, long-time listener, first-time caller. Great to be here finally as a full member. I'm really enjoying the talk so far. So yeah, I'd say I come from a development background prior to my role as product. So I'd say I'm really good on the execution quadrant of this, but in particular on the product delivery side. Where sort of based on my personality and the teams that I've had, one of the things that I've been working on recently is more on the stakeholder management side. There are a lot of very dynamic and big personalities in the room, and finding the path where we're all sort of working in the same direction. It's tougher than I ever imagined it would be. I love it, but it's something that I really have to work at. So,
any tips that you've discovered so far on how to bridge all of those diverse opinions and personalities?
So there's this technique that was sort of taught to me by a previous manager, not in product, but again, like on the delivery side. But this advice is really sort of stuck with me, and it's the idea of in every conversation, particularly when there are disagreements, or if you don't necessarily understand where a person is coming from, take the most respectful interpretation of that thought or that conversation. So what that means, it's really practicing, giving people the benefit of the doubt, and then after that, taking time to clarify what the actual intent was. Now, I'm still very consciously practicing this. It doesn't necessarily come like muscle memory yet, but when I have applied it, like I can see how the conversation shifts in that moment from something that could be potentially heated to something that's really constructive. And then when I don't do it, it takes a lot of work to try and get back to that place, like before you had that that interaction. So yeah, that idea of most respectful interpretation is probably my the best tool in my toolbox right now.
Absolutely. I think that's so critical. And it comes into play in such a key way for product managers, because you're managing all of these different perspectives, that it can feel like, it can feel overwhelming, getting all of this input. And it's easy to forget that the other person on the other side is just trying to solve for the same problems you are from a different perspective.
So we have a lot of people talking about that they want to invest in product strategy, strategic impact this year. So why don't we have, let me pick someone at random, Oriana Wong talk about like what they want to learn about product strategy, and maybe share a couple of thoughts. Can you unmute yourself and talk a bit about that? Okay, let's pick someone else. Andrew, do you want to come up?
Hello there. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, we can hear you great.
Great. Great presentation, by the way. Thank you. And I really like the quadrant. Yeah, for me, just recently, just started a new role about a month and a half ago, and there's a big focus on the product strategy. So that's an area that, there's a need. So I'm to really develop that and be able to, like you said, try to tie back not just building a great product, but tying that back to the overall vision of the company and business objectives, et cetera. So, and really making that strategic impact. And then the other is the customer insight. I haven't had as much, experience on the fluency with data. So that's an area that I can see some development opportunity there, and UX design as well. It's just really the time to have to really develop that skill, just to get the holistic kind of design pattern, foundational sort of knowledge base, so you can try to avoid, the gutter and staying within the guardrails when you're talking with your teams there. And voice of customer, I've always done, and I strongly believe in that. So
that's great. Have you found any good resources on the product strategy side that have helped?
I was reading Roadmaps Relaunched, which I thought was great. And it was just the way, the elements of the roadmap and trying to keep the release plans outside of the roadmap and really keep it high level enough and strategic enough. So there's that understanding at the leadership level in terms of how things tie together from the company vision down. And then just trying to tailor it to, development may want to see some additional aspects, et cetera. So I just that was a great resource I found to kind of ensure that I have crossed all the, dotted all the I's, crossed the T's, so to speak.
That's great. I think you touched on an important point too. I think sometimes as PMs get more senior, they think, okay, I need to be more high level, but in reality, like the details are just as important as they were before, just in a different context. And so as you get more senior, rather than becoming more high level, you're actually increasing your dynamic range, where you're focusing not only on the details, but how they connect to the high level, and being able to work across that is really important.
Okay, so awesome. I'm looking at the time.
Should we do one more?
I'm looking at the time. We're at 6:40 almost. So why don't we resume the presentation, and then we'll come back to questions for sure.
Perfect. That sounds good. So great. So as you've assessed yourself on individual competencies, you can actually assess yourself across all 12 of the competencies and develop a shape that can help you understand where you outperform, where you need focus. In addition, I think for areas where you might need focus, I think there's an important question to ask, like, how much time do I want to spend in this area versus do I want to spend in reinforcing my strength? And ultimately, PMs, even the best PMs, only excel at a handful of competencies. I often advise people to put outperform for no more than 3 of these competencies and put needs focus for no more than 3 competencies to try and give some clarity and some signal to the shape that you're creating. And in addition to evaluating yourself individually, you can also evaluate your team to try to understand how they stack up. And ultimately, what you want to do is have these different shapes fit together like puzzle pieces, so that I think a really important principle from a management standpoint is that the best teams are composed of teams that have individuals who are spiky, who are really great at a particular thing, and where they work collectively with other people on the team, so that individuals should be spiky and teams should be well-rounded. This idea is actually based on a study that McKinsey did with the recruiting firm Egon Zehnder. They wanted to understand the differences between rapidly growing companies and the rest of the pack. And what they were expecting to find happen was that they would find that the highest performing companies had the most well-rounded leaders. But actually what they found was that the outlier companies didn't focus on well-rounded leaders. What they did instead was they recognized that exceptional people do their best work when they're encouraged to use and grow their natural talents. They also recognize that talented people have weaknesses, often in mirror images to their strengths. And so the outlier companies encourage leaders to focus on their strengths, whereas the average companies encourage leaders to focus on their weaknesses. And they came up with this idea that individuals should be spiky and teams should be well-rounded. And ultimately, we can think about this in our own lives. Like, if you're a very data-centric PM, you love living in SQL, you're able to pull out incredible insights from the data. It's potentially really distracting and exhausting to be told that you need to improve your design skills. That's not where your strength is. Instead, you should be paired with a great designer who excels at that other area of competency. In order to make the most out of this insight, you really need to know your shape. And if you know your shape and you know the shape of other people on your team, you can start to put together those shapes like puzzle pieces. And so in terms of interpreting your shape, there's a couple of different ways that we can think about it with respect to the competencies. And so the competency framework, these 12 ideas are organized into 4 natural groupings. The first 2 hemispheres, the Western and the Eastern hemispheres, contrast product builders with product architects. Product builders are great at product delivery. They're great at managing people. Product architects are great at understanding customers and building product strategy. In a very rough sense, we can use the analogy of building a house or building any sort of architecture. You need people that are great at both the building and you need people who are great at the architecting. If you tend towards the builder side, chances are you like to get shit done. You're really good at it. You're great at managing teams. You're great at product delivery. This is incredibly critical. You can't have a successful product without it. To grow, you need to figure out how do you grow your architecture skills, or how do you pair yourself with a team that's really great at architecture. You might also have a PM who's really good at the architect side, knows how to design products that move the needles for the customers and the company, but they need to work with really great builders in order to bring those ideas to life. And so this is the first thing as you think about your clusters of competency, is to ask yourself, do I tend more to be a builder or do I tend more to be an architect? The Northern and Southern hemispheres actually contrast product managers and product leaders. Early on in your career, it's really important to master product execution and customer insight. Those form the sort of raw material of being able to deliver a great, impactful feature. And then as you get more senior, you need to focus on product strategy and influencing people. Those are the things that help you ladder up individual features into long-term strategy and have the influence throughout the organization that you need in order to drive that strategy to completion. Really importantly, is these are all a matter of relative emphasis and weight. All 12 competencies are important at any stage from APM to CPO. There's never a point at which you shouldn't be thinking about product delivery or quality assurance. And as a junior PM, there's never a point where you shouldn't be thinking about product outcome ownership or stakeholder management. The point here is that the relative emphasis changes as people become more senior. And because of that, it's important to focus on the particular areas that might be holding you back from getting to that next step. And so, as you think about growing, think about, these are the things I'm good at today. In this next role, as a new GPM or as a new director, how is my role changing? How is the relative emphasis of these different demands changing? And what do I need to do to fill in any gaps that might be holding me back? We can also use the sort of relative shapes to think about different types of PMs. One common archetype of PM is the product innovator, who really excels at the design side of things and the user research side of things. So they take voice of the customer really seriously. They take user design really seriously. They take product vision and roadmap really seriously. So these innovative PMs are often a vital force for innovation within their companies. They encourage companies to think disruptively rather than incrementally. But innovative PMs often suffer a weakness, which is the mirror image of their strength, which is that they have a hard time breaking their big ideas into iterative, measurable, experimental pieces. To solve for this, it's really important that innovative PMs get paired with execution-oriented, data-driven teammates who can encourage them to think about how to take their big ideas and form them into a smaller, more executable package. Another common archetype is the growth hacker. So growth-centric PMs tend to combine speed, analytical insight, test-driven product development to deliver measurable gains that are critical to the business. Companies should be careful not to mistake growth optimization for product innovation. These are actually different. Growth optimization is a matter of taking the product market fit that you already have and getting the most out of it, whereas product innovation is about finding new sources of product market fit. There's a fantastic career path now around growth-centric PMs. These PMs can choose to focus on that career path and really reinforce their strengths around fluency with data and business outcome ownership, or they can choose to become more well-rounded PMs and take what they're naturally really good at and augment it with capabilities around user experience design and voice of the customer. Another common archetype is the project manager. I think of a good project manager as someone who's great at execution, but hasn't really mastered the craft of creating products that people love and that move the needle for the company. I think this particular archetype from a long-term product standpoint is actually a failure mode. What you want to do is, if you have more of a product management orientation, which happens when a person is just starting out, or if the demands of the role are really aligned towards delivery, it's really important for these PMs to think about, where do they want to grow? And typically they want to grow around skills around customer insight and product strategy. The other type of archetype that I see pretty common in organizations is the people manager, is someone who's fantastic at leading people, but hasn't had a lot of product experience, oftentimes because the great people managers are able to rally teams, stakeholders, and senior leaders. These are people that executives count on and look to drive a product organization. But it's important to recognize that product leaders have to build both people as well as products. And so naturally talented people managers need to focus on developing customer insight and product strategy skills. This will give them the tools to not only lead, but to lead the team to the right destination. So this was kind of a quick whirlwind tour of how you can think about the competencies in terms of your own orientation as a builder or an architect, how you can think about how things change over time, and what the demands are as you get more senior, and what some common archetypes are for different types of PMs. One of the things that I think is really interesting is recently there's been a growing conversation about subspecialties of PMs, the needs of a core PM versus a growth PM versus a platform PM versus an innovation PM. are all really different. And I think increasingly companies are starting to recognize that there's different subspecialties of the product role in the same way that they recognize that there's different subspecialties of the engineering role. Today, we don't have full stack engineers in most companies. We have front-end engineers and back-end engineers and ML engineers. Similarly, companies are growing towards, we don't necessarily have to have full stack PMs. We can have PMs that are focused on a particular type of product work. And so this is a slide from a Reforge article on the growing specialization of product management, which I highly recommend. And so my next question for everyone is, as you think about these different types of PMs, or even, some of the archetypes that I went through, like the product innovator or the project manager or the people manager, what type of PM are you today? And what type of PM do you want to grow into? So Rhythm, should we start with that question, or do people have, or are there questions that people have in chat that we want to talk about first?
Well, I'll say while people put in their comments in the chat, I'll read out a question which came recently by Philippa, which is around, do you have any suggestions of how to measure success improvement as a product manager, particularly in the areas of product strategy?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's not a quick way to do it. Like, one of the things that I think is true about really good strategy is it's not based on a particular goal where you can run a test on one week and then see the results on another week. I think from a strategy perspective, the thing to really focus on is defining very clearly what your strategy is, why that's the strategy, and what success will look like. And so, let's say you're the chief product officer of Tinder, and Tinder has historically done really well with younger users, but is starting to lose product market fit with those users as they move over to other places to meet each other, like Instagram or TikTok. So in that case, you can create a product strategy that's informed by a lot of user research, that's informed by data, that releases a roadmap of features specifically for Gen Z. You won't necessarily see the mix of users change overnight, but over the course of a year or a couple of quarters or a year or even more, you'll start to see that Gen Z users are becoming more frequent users, more engaged users, and more active users on the platform. So the thing I would start out with is, define your strategy really clearly. 2 is ask yourself, if we're successful, what does the world look like in a year? Ask that question both qualitatively and quantitatively. And then not immediately, but after some time, after 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, ask the question of, are we moving closer to that reality that we charted, that we wanted to create as a result of our strategy being the right one? And if you are, that's great. It means your strategy is working. If you're not, then the question is, is that the right strategy? Or maybe it wasn't executed well. Then you can start to dig into why you're not progressing towards that reality that you set out to create.
I see multiple comments about that people want to get into becoming an innovation PM. So anything that you want to add there, Ravi?
Yeah, it's very, it's a type of product management that I really love. It's a very compelling part of product. It's a lot of fun. It's really interesting to create 0 to 1 products. I think if you want to be an innovation PM, then it's important to look for career opportunities where you really get the opportunity to do that sort of discovery work that you love, which is either going to be at the very early stage, or is going to actually be later stage at a company which is starting to hit the ceiling of its initial product market fit and is expanding into other areas. And so you tend to see more innovation very, very early or later. You tend to see less innovation during the scale-up phase, where things are growing very quickly and where the company's really focused on growth rather than on innovation. Importantly as well is, there's a lot of people want to be innovation PMs. There's a lot of demand for those types of roles. Those are sexy roles. They're great roles. but you shouldn't, as a product manager, feel that that's where you need to be in order to be really successful. If anything, I think, from a career opportunity standpoint, from a wealth of opportunities standpoint, the area that I see the least fulfilled today are the roles around platform PMs. And what was interesting was, during this fall cohort of Reforge, there were a lot of people who wanted to really invest in themselves as platform PMs, but there aren't a lot of resources out there yet that help people understand that path. So go to what you're really passionate about. There will be opportunity in anything, but also don't feel like you have to be an innovation PM in order to be a real PM. There's important, critical, impactful work happening in all of these different areas.
Awesome. I'll let you proceed, Ravi, but I just want to say that we do have Ravi till 7:30 with us. So all those questions in the chat, we'll definitely come to those after we've finished with the presentation.
That sounds good. Let's take one or two answers from the group. So as you look at this, what type of PM are you today? What type of PM do you want to grow into? And it doesn't necessarily be different. You may be doing the type of work today that you want to be doing in the future as well. So who wants to get us started?
Yeah, so why don't we get Dimitri to jump up, and he says, I'm a platform/innovation PM and want to expand into growth hacking as Steve Jobs. That's interesting.
Hi, Ravi. Really enjoyed your presentation. Really awesome insight and very well structured. What I usually find with platform or innovation PM work is that you make the first sale, but then you have to go past your first sale and you have to keep growing. At a certain point, you're going to hit a ceiling. Usually, if it is a startup business, you're going to hit ceiling fairly fast. Maybe you go through your second round of investment. And then you have to have an inflection point where you're going to grow again. Being able to consistently deliver on this is extremely hard. And Steve Jobs is one of my role models who has consistently been able to do it over and over again. So I would really like to expand into that. If you can give any advice how maybe to go on that path, it is very welcome.
Yeah, I think Steve Jobs has done a really good job. I think two companies that have actually done a really good job here in different ways are Apple and Amazon. And more so than any other of the FAANG companies, they have both succeeded in a vast number of completely unrelated industries. And I think both of them approach product innovation in different ways, but have been very successful at it. Versus, Google and Facebook and others have been incredibly successful, but their businesses are largely pinned to the thing that got them initial product market fit. I think for both of those companies, and I'm less familiar with how Apple does things, but for both of those companies, the thing that they do incredibly well is zoom into what's going on with the customer and how do we solve for what they need. And Jeff Bezos has a quote that I always butcher, but it's something to the effect of, the one thing I know about customers is no matter what problem we solve for them, they will always be dissatisfied. And so, this creates a really rich environment for Amazon to innovate, because every problem that they solve, they know that there's going to be a new problem created. Another interesting example of this, I think, that comes out of knowing the customer really well is Facebook, in its rise to where it is today, created a whole bunch of problems for teens by creating a social network that was based on a single massive social graph where everything that you shared went out to all of your 2,000 closest friends. Snapchat came in and said, actually, that's not what teens want. Teens want a much more private and controllable space to be able to share. And so Facebook has created a mirror image of problems. And if we solve that mirror image, we can create something that is equally impactful. And so I think if you are excited about creating these kind of overlapping S-curves of innovation, a lot of the raw material comes down to being really close to customers and understanding how to turn what customers are saying and what customers are doing into really great experiments or into really great hypotheses that test out new product ideas. And Amazon's done that really well through their PRD and their press release process. Apple has a different process. But I think, with all companies that are good at that, they have some way of taking those customer insights and turning them into product strategy.
Cheers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Do we want to proceed or?
Yeah, let's, do we want to do just general Q&A?
Yeah, okay. We can do that.
Or do we not have time? If we don't have time, that's totally fine.
Yeah, we're at 7. So I think let's wrap up the presentation and then we can do Q&A and take up all the questions that we have remaining in the chat.
Cool. That sounds good. So just to wrap up, we didn't get a lot of time for Q&A, but I'll be around for the next half an hour or so. As I mentioned at the start, I started a new company called Scale. The company's focused on helping people level up with the help of an individual coach. If you're interested, if that sounds like something that you might benefit from, you can go to scalehire.com to learn more. We currently have, we're starting to accept people off a wait list as we build up our programs and our coaching. In addition, if you want to learn more about the things that I talked about here, just go to my site. It's ravi-mehta.com. And there I have a toolkit which you can download, which has all of these different worksheets, and you can draw out your shape. You can evaluate yourself. There's also a spreadsheet of expectations for every one of the 12 competencies, all the way from APM to PM to senior PM up to VP. And so there's a lot more to dig into there if you're interested in using this framework to evaluate yourself or your team.
Awesome. Well, firstly, I would like to thank Ravi. This talk was almost a year in making due to scheduling conflicts, but we are so glad that Ravi, you could make it today and share this amazing framework with us. There are so many questions in the chat. Let's go through them one by one. But I would just say a couple of things. I really thank Ravi, but post the event, you all will be receiving a feedback survey. We are product managers. We love feedback. So tell us how we did on the event. Would love to hear your feedback. And one more thing, our next event is scheduled for February. Details will be out soon, but we have the head of product operations at Pendo, Christine, joining us next month. Details will be out soon, so watch out for that. And with that, Ravi, are we okay to move into the Q&A?
Yeah, perfect. Let's do it.
Awesome. So I'll start reading questions and we'll try to cover as much as possible in the next few minutes that we have. So one of the questions that we have here is by Sandeep, that getting into product management is challenging for sure. But after being a PM for 6 years now, growing into PM leadership roles seems to be a bigger challenge. Most hiring managers want someone who's already a product leader. So how to break into product leadership?
This is absolutely true. It is harder to break into management as a product manager than it is, I think, to initially get into the field. I think there's a few reasons for this. One of which is that PM as a role is just a high leverage role. There's typically not a lot of PMs within a company. If you think about the average size of an engineering team versus the average size of a PM team, the PM team is going to be much smaller, and that just naturally leads to less management opportunity. In addition, a really good product leader can manage 3 to 7 PMs, and that's the size of that's a pretty sizable PM team already for a lot of companies. And so all of that means that getting into a management role can be challenging, especially beyond kind of just managing 1 or 2 PMs. When I get asked this question, I like to use user framework in order to get into a product management role where you can grow quickly and you can go from managing a small team to managing a large team in a relatively short amount of time. There's 2 things that you need to look for. And these 2 things, I think if you look for in any successful product leader's career, you'll typically see a confluence of these 2 things. The first one we all know, which is you should look for a company that's growing quickly, because a company that is growing quickly, a rising tide is going to float all boats. And so you're going to have opportunities to grow with the company. The second one is one not a lot of people talk about. The second thing to keep in mind is you want to look for a company that has a shallow bench of talent. If you're at a company that has a really deep bench of talent, then when opportunities come up, they may or may not come your way. They might go to another PM. And so, a lot of people like to go to the big tech companies like Google and Facebook. They're incredible places to build a career. They're not incredible places to build a large team, in part because they're not growing as quickly as before, and they have an incredibly deep bench of product talent. And so moving into a management role can take time. And even when you do move into a management role, your team will grow in a more slow, deliberate way. But a startup that's growing quickly, that doesn't yet have a deep bench of product talent, that's where you're going to get an opportunity to manage a growing team. That doesn't mean that they don't have talent, that they have poor talent. It means that they don't have a very deep bench of talent. And if you look at most successful product leaders' careers, especially VPs and CPOs, myself included, you will see a phase of their career where these two things were in alignment, where they were in a fast growth environment with a shallow bench of talent, and they got a lot of opportunity very quickly. For me, that was TripAdvisor. I grew my team from 7 PMs to 70 PMs in the course of the 5 years that I was there. It was an incredible opportunity, time to join the company. You'll see that for other people as well. And so if your principal thing is to grow into a manager, I would look for that confluence of factors.
Awesome. Well, talking about startups, here's a very interesting question that I'm curious about. Like, Alex is asking that he's a new PM working alone in a new startup working towards launch. And he says he basically has to be in charge of all the 12 competencies that you mentioned.
Yeah.
So any advice on where to focus, knowing that, we can't do it all?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to say, look, as a product manager, not every product responsibility needs to be on you. Look at other people on your team and see if there's people in engineering or in analytics or other parts of the company that really fill in some of those competencies. People love working on product. They will rise at the opportunity to do that oftentimes. And so it might be that if you really need to go deep on data and that's not an area where you have strength, there's an analyst on your team that, given the opportunity to do some proactive insight or to write some specs based on what they find, they're going to be more than happy to take that opportunity. Same with engineering. So the first thing I think is to frame, how can I think about my team in a broader and more inclusive way, so that you can bring that set of people to the problem. I think the second thing is, don't try to be everything. Like, there's going to be one or a couple of things that ultimately your product is going to live or die by, that will often come from the strategy. So think about, what does my strategy require me to do well, and really focus on those areas. And so, if you're in a fast growing consumer social startup, you're going to need to understand growth really well. But if you're in a sales driven enterprise B2B company, you're going to need to know the sales side of things really well. And so you can't be great at everything. Align the things that you're focused on as strengths with the things that the company needs to get the maximum leverage, and then rely on people more broadly within the org.
Oops. Here's another interesting question. In your model, Ravi, you talked about a lot of different skills, but not too much about product marketing activities. Is that considered like a different role altogether?
I think that is. The goal here was to create what are the 12 competencies to excel at product management. And there's a bunch of things that are orthogonal to that, and there's a bunch of things that are parallel to that. So the orthogonal things are things like collaboration, communication, other soft skills that cut. Customer obsession might be one of them. So a company will often have like cultural traits or other soft skills that they're looking for. Those can work in concert with these competencies. In addition, there's parallel sets of competencies for product marketing, for product design, for engineering, for growth marketing, for anything, any other functional group within the org. What I really wanted to do with this was create an opinionated framework for classical product managers. And that was something that we struggled with, is how to make sure that it doesn't get diluted by trying to be a framework for everyone.
All right. Another question by Yuting. This one is, I think, what mostly people go through when they're trying to break into product management. And since you touched upon APMs a bit as well, how does one gain experience in the PM category especially when they don't have any prior experience and they want to break into to this field. It's kind of like a chicken and egg problem.
It is a chicken and egg problem. It could be challenging. I think it's gotten easier. I'd suggest a few things. One is like look for opportunities within your existing company. Like if you start in engineering, maybe there's an opportunity to move into product. Maybe you can't do that full time, but you can take on some product work. So the flip side of the question about being at a startup, like if you're at a startup and you see the PM is completely overloaded and has way more to do in a day than is possible to complete, you can go to that person and offer your help, and they will be more than happy to take you up on it. So look for really scrappy ways within your current company to get product experience. Number two, I think, is side projects are really good. Like a lot of people have a side hustle now, teaming up with either doing it solo or teaming up with a handful of people and building a product on your own is a great way to make yourself a product manager overnight. Like, I don't think you can make yourself an engineer overnight. I don't think you can make yourself a doctor overnight. I hope you can't. But you can, like, by building a product, make yourself into a product manager and change your narrative. Three is there's really great courses now available to people that want to get into product. Reforge has one called Product Management Fundamentals. Lenny Rachitsky has a great product manager accelerator. And so, at the same time that you're learning things from an experience standpoint, you can also learn things from an academic standpoint and bridge the two together. And then, if you're in school, your undergrad or grad, there's a lot of companies now that offer really interesting rotation programs. So I would say it is hard to break into product, but it's easier than it's ever been. And the demand for product is really high. So, I think for someone that's really earnest about it and committed to it, they'll find a way to get in.
And a shameless plug, definitely come to TPMA events to grow your knowledge.
There you go.
Okay, jokes aside, another question we have from Anka is about first innovation, it's about domain knowledge. So when you start as the first innovation PM at a startup, how important it is to have deep domain knowledge in the industry or about the customers you serve in order to be successful?
It's a really good question. I have a very opinionated answer on this, which is it's not important to have domain experience. There are some exceptions to that rule, but I think oftentimes by not having domain experience, you can bring a different perspective and solve things in a way that hasn't been solved before. More so than having direct domain experience, I think it's helpful to have experience with similarly structured problems. So if you've worked on a local restaurant marketplace, you might be able to work really effectively on a health provider marketplace. The structure of those are going to borrow from each other, but the fact that you don't have a healthcare background is going to allow you to think about things in a way that's different and not completely driven by the best practice in that industry. There are definitely advantages to having domain knowledge. I'm not saying that there isn't, but if there's a domain that you're really passionate about that you don't have experience in, I don't think it means it's off the table. If there is a domain that you're really passionate about and you want to go deep and build in that domain, then you absolutely should, and you've got some advantages there.
Awesome. Another question here around PM resources. So Joey is asking that what are the resources that you found helpful in your product management journey? And I'll add to that is, like, what he also says that there seems to be endless resources out there and everyone seems to be having like a different opinion. So I think the question would be, how do we prioritize these resources as well in order to grow our knowledge and skills?
That sounds good. And Rhythm, did you just spotlight me and I turned it off by accident?
Oh no, you're still spotlighted.
Okay, cool. There is a lot of resources out there. There are some really good, like, just foundational resources. I think Marty Kagan's book is one of those. So Inspired is a really great place to start. I think Lenny Rachitsky has created a bunch of foundational content and his course is really good. Reforge has created a bunch of foundational content and their material is really good. So, I think today, like, one of the reasons that we actually started Scale was over and over again, I hear the problem of like people just spending lots and lots of time learning and consuming more information. But the thing that's missing is ultimately to grow as an individual, you need to be focused on a growth loop where it starts with learning, then you practice, then you get feedback on how to make your practice even better, then you learn some more, then you practice, then you get feedback, and you just keep doing that over and over again. So, this is true with engineers, it's true with product. It's easy to get stuck in a mode where all you're doing is learning and you're not putting the stuff into practice. So rather than look for more and more material, find like one or two of these really great resources, maybe commit to a program. And then once you've learned that foundational set of skills, look for ways to practice, look for ways to get feedback from your peers, from coaches, from others, and focus on the application rather than on the accumulation of knowledge.
Awesome. Another question about young PMs. What would you advise either to focus on like a specific skill set, like personalization within products or user experience, versus an industry like retail, security, or would you advise something else, like another approach?
Yeah, so I think the great thing about product as a career is there's lots of optionality, and it is possible as a PM to move from one space to an unrelated space. The more steps removed from what you're doing today, the space you want to move into, the harder it is to do. So you can't go completely laterally from one thing to another, but you can make these really calculated jumps from one space to another. So I think if you want to, focus on something, it actually doesn't matter. It can be something that's, technology-based, like personalization or ML or trust and security, or it can be something that's industry-based, like focusing on healthcare or security. It actually doesn't matter. It can be either one, just as long as you're really thoughtful about what your T-shape is. Where do you want to go deep and where do you want to go broad? And when you're making the next step in your career, how do you get the maximum velocity towards where you want to ultimately be? Because if you are an incredible trust and safety PM, you're going to be able to work in fintech, you're going to be able to work in social, you're going to be able to work in gaming, and you can do fantastic. If you are an incredible fintech PM, you'll have more than enough opportunities in fintech. And so I think it really comes back to what we've been talking about, which is identify the space where you're really spiky, which could be domain-based, it could be technology-based, it could be based on some other aspect of your experience or your skills, and invest in that. And by doing that in a really thoughtful way, there will be opportunities to kind of move within a certain set of guardrails.
That's the beauty of the practice of product management, right? Like so many
Absolutely.
skills are transferable and so many aspects of it are transferable to different industries. A question we had earlier when the session started was around how do we maintain that balance between quality versus shipping quickly? So around, you touched upon product delivery. So how do we maintain that balance?
It's a really good question. And it's one I struggle with. My tendency is to focus on quality over quick delivery. And then there's the opposite advice, which is like you should, if you're not embarrassed by your product, you probably shipped it too late. I really like, there's a model called the Kano model, so CANO, that talks about the fact that there's experience, there's things that delight the customer and there's things that dissatisfy the customer. And if we always think about adding new features in terms of, adding more features adds to more satisfaction, which is the typical mode of a lot of PMs, myself included, that leaves out that there's things that, if they're not present, they immediately undermine the experience. And so a couple of good examples. So Spotify, if a song skips in the middle and you got to wait 10 seconds before the song stops again, it doesn't matter how good their playlist feature is or how good their curated music lists are, you're going to immediately lose all satisfaction with that product. There's another analogy, which is hotels. Like, let's say you're staying in the Ritz and you're spending an ungodly amount of money per night to stay there. If you have a cold shower in the morning, no matter how much luxury the rest of the experience incorporated, you're not going to feel great about that product experience. And so in the effort to move quickly, it's important to think about not only what's going to satisfy your users, but what's potentially going to dissatisfy your users. And if you ship something where your satisfaction, you're not as far up on the satisfaction curve as you could be, that's okay. If you ship something where you're really high on the dissatisfaction curve, then that's a problem. So I didn't do the framework justice, I never do, but research Kano model, and you'll see a really interesting graph that I think helps make it a lot clearer than I just did.
Awesome. I think one last question that we have, and this is very interesting. This is a very interesting question. It's around a lot of teams within an organization claim to be the voice of the customers. And I personally face this every day as well, working in a fintech company. Customer success, technical support, sales engineers, onboarding, these teams and these team members, they are the voice of the customers for sure. But then how do we as PMs differentiate our value?
I think the distinction is to not just be the voice of the customer, but to be the voice of the customer in the context of defining product strategy, which ultimately defines company strategy. Today, in most cases, especially most of the places where we work, companies win or lose based on the product. It used to be that companies win or lost based on supply chains and operations and logistics and economies of scale and marketing. If you think about Procter & Gamble and brand management, a lot of that has, some of that's still there, but a lot of that has given away to product-based innovation. And so the product team is uniquely in the position of hearing that voice of the customer and turning it into product strategy that ultimately enables the company to accomplish what it wants. And so that's where I think the unique thing is. It's not a matter of just hearing from customers. It's a matter of synthesizing that to meet their needs in a way that's beyond what they can express. So listening to customers, reacting to customers is important, but being able to truly empathize and understand beyond what they're able to say is incredibly important, and gets back to what we were talking about earlier with the Amazon and the Apple case. Like being able to do that consistently well enables you to create these overlapping S curves of innovation that ultimately create companies like Apple and Amazon, which are able to succeed in so many diverse areas.
Awesome. Well, I hope I covered all of the questions in the chat, but Ravi, this was an amazing session. I'm reading off other comments as well, which talk about the model being so great and your thoughts and opinions being so insightful. So thank you so much for doing this. We hope to we hope to see you again in another TPMA event with another talk. And thank you everyone for tuning in this evening and staying so late. Again, we will be sending, or I think we have already sent the feedback form. Please give us feedback. Would love to hear back from you all, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great to be with all of you. Feel free to reach out. I'm pretty accessible. So love the conversation and all the questions, and good luck to everyone in assessing your strengths and managing your career.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.